The
illustrious Jabba bids you welcome. I'm going to regret this.
I'm Pete Mitchell. He's Peyton Jones. And this is the Church Planter Podcast, brought to you by Church Planter Magazine.
Hey, Church Planter, welcome to the Church Planter Podcast. I'm on my own today. As the song says, all by myself, by my lonesome. In my defense, I was left unattended on today's podcast without Pete Mitchell, who was busy somewhere losing fat, working out, putting on bulk, and getting ultra ripped. And anyways, so that's my shout out to my partner. But I'm on here with a guest. You know, it's funny. When books come out, I make it a point to get certain authors everything they write. And one of those guys, it won't surprise any of you who know me and know what I write, that author is Sean Benesh. If you don't know Sean Benesh, he has written a number of books. Some of my favorites, like Bikeable Church, to me was such a unique little book that talks about his relationship with the Portland cycling community and how he just was himself, and God used that. And he reimagines what it looks like for church planners to rethink how they do ministry, in particular in a city like Portland. This guy is all about missional context. That is his passion. I would say he's passionate about church planning. I don't know that he'd say that. I think he's passionate about Christ. I think he's passionate about mission. And that's really, if you boil Dr. Sean Benesh down. And there is a doctor there, by the way. He's too cool for you to know that if you're just looking at him reading his post. But he actually has learned things to say. But what I love about Sean, if I'm going to quote Rod Tidwell, that's what I totally dig about you, man, off Jerry Maguire. For young people, watch it. You don't know what I'm talking about. But what I love about Sean is almost everything this dude writes is from the trenches. And he's got a new book. Before I let him talk, I'm going to tell you what the title is. He's got a brand new book that is just dropped called Through Barren Wastelands, in search of explorers, pioneers, misfits, and the apostolic imagination. I get all gushy when I read that title. Sean, always an honor, man. Good to have you on the show. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, great to be here.
Yeah, and I don't wax that praise on. I don't say that to all the guys, Sean. So, but I honestly feel like you have something to say, and your blog posts have been on fire. If you've not checked out his website, you definitely need to head on over to intrepidmissions.com. He's got a book called Intrepid as well that came from. But Sean, tell us a little bit. Tell my audience that doesn't know. Tell me your history. Where you been? How'd you get into this crazy little thing called church planning?
Oh, the origin story, right?
Yeah. Oh, totally, dude. So I'm sitting here. For those of you that can't see, I've got a Superman. I'm sitting right now in the Fortress of Solitude with a Superman shirt on. So that's fitting. Of course, Sean is a DC guy, right? Not a Marvel guy. Totally DC.
Sorry, I'm not. If they would produce better content, I would buy it. But it started and ended with Batman.
I agree, brother. I agree. And Iron Man, just boom. Jon Favreau, The Mandalorian. I mean, come on. What are you going to say? He's awesome. Yeah. He's a genius.
Yeah.
All right. Tell us your story.
Okay. So to piggyback on the whole origin story of superheroes, I mean, usually we see a theme, right? Either they're born with innate abilities and they're just awesome, like Superman, or their stories really are birthed out of like pain and tragedy, like Batman. You know, if there's no childhood tragedy, there's no Batman. Plus, being a billionaire also kind of helps too. So I have been involved in church planning really for the last 20 years, roughly. I mean, I'm at the point where it's almost 20, so I'm definitely rounding up. So a lot of my storyline really begins with I'm not and wasn't a good church planner. And as a result, my go-to line is, I was such a good fundraiser, I had to get a part-time job. So that for me, unintentionally stepping into bivocational church planting was literally one of the best things that ever happened to me. So it just opened up my eyes, because previously, coming out of college, I was on staff at a couple churches and, living and immersed in that whole church bubble. And again, when I stepped into church planting, it was like, oh, wow. And surrounding my life with people who don't know Christ, have no interest in church. And that really opened my eyes up to not just bivocational ministry, but just like being then intentional from that point on in kind of stepping out of the mainstream of a lot of the church planting rhetoric and surrounding my life, just living around and being with people who have zero interest in church or God or Christianity. So that really was kind of the origins of that. And really, it was just moving farther in that direction. And as I continue to do so, it was the realization that, like, holy cow, like I'm living like a missionary life, and I'm living on the mission field, but like I never left. I never left the US of A. And so again, that was a part of it, just, re-envisioning, not even re-envisioning, but just opening my eyes up to see this whole world that I just didn't know before. And so that really was so foundational of everything. And so, yeah, that was kind of the beginning of that. So since then, been a church planner, a very subpar one, a couple times over, worked for a denomination as a church planting strategist, and, taught church planting in seminary. And then, there's a lot of wrinkles into the origin story that would probably be really boring. So, but that's just kind of like some of those initial moments that kind of push me in this direction.
Well, you mentioned in your book, you start off, you talk about the wanderlust, and, I think that's an apostolic trait. Like, I love that you bring that out. Talk to us a little bit about what that means to you as a church planter, to have this sense of wanderlust.
Yeah. So, so again, my life right now is very, I don't want to say divided, but there's different buckets that I live my life. It's not, there's one me, there's many me's. So what,
You
part
said
of my,
many me.
I didn't say many, I said many. So there definitely is a part of my life that is immersed in academia. Like, I love it. I love school. I love daily time in the classroom. Right when we're done, I'm jetting off to teach. Like, I absolutely love it. At the same time, I know literally by the end of the school year, like, I'm just emotionally fried. I'm mentally fried. Like, I just need a vacation, like a mental vacation. So the last couple of years, I had begun just picking up books on really just adventure, or it could be early explorers from conquistadors to the Apaches to wherever. And it was just like just reading all these historical accounts, some inspirational, some horrific. But it just really like ignited something within me in that, like, why don't ministry books ever sound like this? It's almost like, it's just like watching grass grow. And there's very little that I read that just stirs and capture my heart and imagination and that wanderlust. And again, part of it too is also, this is how I'm wired, is part academia, part creative. Like, before I came to Christ, I started college as an art major, and that was the whole trajectory of my life. And then boom, Jesus came in, redirected, but there's still that part of me, that creative, that wanderlust. And so when I set out to write, I literally had in my mind all these books that I had just been diving into about early explorers, or more modern day ones like the End of the Wild fame. And again, every time I read those books, like there's just something that resonates, like going off the grid, moving against the grain of society. And in this case, just moving against the grain of ministry. And again, since I've been involved in church planting now almost 20 years, it's the realization that, like, where where is the adventure in church planning? And so much of it has been domesticated. And I, talk about how it's led by people who love spreadsheets, and, the pioneers, the explorers, the misfits, they've just kind of faded away into the background. And so this was a book just to kind of explore these topics, explore my love for exploring and wanderlust, and how do we bring the sense back into church planning, where it is an adventure, it is a career, or it is a vocation, not a career. And we do it because we're so compelled and called, not because it's the cool, hip, trendy thing to do.
Right. So often, I've thought about it that you've got Dr. Jones in the Harvard lecture. And, it's interesting because you're an academic and an adventurer combined, right? You're a bit like Indiana Jones. And I think what I hear you saying is, how do we get from, the halls of Harvard to out raiding temples, kind of cracking the whip, actually living this adventure. So one of my questions is, how does a church planner, how do they live on that adventure?
Yeah. So, that also feeds into what I do and lead for Intrepid, just because you have a lot of these dominoes, or at least moving parts in, I call it the machinery of church planning. And if you want to break free, really the biggest piece arguably is the financial one, right? Like, this is fun to talk. Let's be wanderlust. Let's go to the margins. Let's focus on off the beaten path places and people. Let's do this. And then there's the, oh crap, like, how am I going to fund this? Like, my denomination may not fund me because I'm going to this overlooked place. Or the conventional church planning funding mechanism is I get a lot of people in my gathering who eventually pay me. So that immediately rules out going to marginal communities, marginal people, because that's a horrible model. In the same way, we wouldn't expect international missionaries moving into a slum community in Mumbai to do the same. So in our cohorts, the whole purpose is, all right, so how do we do this? And it's going to take a different model. And what I mean by that is a different funding model. And that's why those going through our cohorts are looking to start some kind of social enterprise, for-profit, nonprofit, so they can really live out this calling and not be so hamstrung by our current funding models.
Right. Right. So, and I track with you. I get your newsletter, have for years. And so I can remember back when you were like, hey, I'm putting a collective together. It's a few years ago now. And I'm looking for people that want to start up businesses. And I want to kind of track together. That struck me as adventurous. You were pushing out into the unknown then. And of course, I know you have, kind of missionary roots. First time I ever heard of you was with the guys at the Upstream. And I remember coming back from Europe going, gosh, these guys get it, man. Like, of course, European missionaries are always going to, kind of align with European missionaries. But that was the first time I had heard of you was through them. And then, just kind of tracking with you, you don't seem to get in a rut. You seem like you're always pushing yourself kind of out, which I know is a big part of what, the book is about. How would you find God fueling your apostolic imagination? How have you kept hungry? How have you kept, I guess, really not kept hungry? I think you're always hungry. The real question is, how are you satiating that apostolic hunger that's in you to do more?
Yeah, that's great. And I would say, and again, in light of what you and I were talking about before, or just even the most recent newsletter I sent out, an article was, I compared, sorry. So I compared much of like our church planning, publishing industry and et cetera, really on, compared it with the whole boy band era. It's very generic. It sounds the same, et cetera. So for me to fuel my heart, my soul, my desire is, I just had to make a conscious decision number of years ago, just to completely remove myself from that, because church planting world ends up simply being an echo chamber. And I don't mean that honestly in any disparaging way. It's just we're prone to groupthink, right? And that's what we do. So for me to remove myself, I literally had to step out of those conversations and immerse myself in a whole different world outside of quote unquote ministry. And whether it's my reading appetite, things that I do for my occupation or occupations, experiences like explore, kind of feeding that itch, whether it's, moving down the track of, more photography, more exploring, journaling, adventure journalism, whatever, just kind of fueling these things, as well as my own startups. Like one day I was like, I'm tired of this publishing industry. Screw it. I'm starting my own publishing house. And I did that for a few years.
It's funny you say that, because your books are what people need to hear. They're not necessarily what sells. So this is the problem with the publishing industry, is the stuff that's going to sell is going to be the boy band, kind of like you're saying. And the stuff that people actually need to listen to, it's like you have to do that. And even Alan Hirsch right now is, as big of a seller as he is, he's saying, I need absolute freedom right now to publish what needs to be said. He's got that prophetic bone in him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And that's part of it too, is just, again, no conspiracy theories at all, because publishing, I feel like I gotta repeat that over and over. And that I'm not crying foul. It's a business, just like a record label is a business, and you want to crank out something that's going to be a good return on investment. So I just had to not play, I guess, those games. And I had conversations with a number of publishing, companies. And at the end, like, I need, like we were talking about with Alan, like, I just need that creative freedom. I just want to say what I need to say and get it out on my own timeline. Because I remember one publishing company, like, yeah, we love this. This is great. We're looking at our time clock. Yeah, we can release this in 3 years. And my thought was like, the whole world is going to be different in 3 years. Right. I can't wait 3 years. So
I was turned down a book. I was actually turned down 2, but my last book contract was turned down because it was too radical. And they didn't have a box to put it in. And I think that's kind of coming back to this. Like, you were advocating a very radical approach. Like, you liken church planners to pioneers in your book. In fact, you have a chapter called Pioneers Found New Communities. Tell me a little bit about what you mean by that.
So I tried to, in my mind, again, none of the categories or labels are, they're nowhere found in Scripture. We would argue they fall probably under the umbrella of the A's in the right apostolic. And I was just trying to think, like, again, trying to remove myself from some of these categories to go, who really are these pioneers or explorers? And that's why I broke them into 3 categories: the explorers, the pioneers, and then the misfits. And the explorers really are the ones that blaze the new trails. And, and again, was just coming off of reading a lot of these old explorers, and just like, they're the ones, forging a new land, which again, that's also laced in a lot of the tension of, colonial expansion. Because you're explorer, you're but actually there's people that already live there and have so for generations, but that's another conversation. So explorers kind of identify new terrain. The pioneers come on the heels and then establish the communities. And I was also thinking, because one of the courses I do teach and have taught was History of the American City, which I love, because it really is this conversation about how were cities started, and in particular, how were cities on the U.S. soil started. You know what I mean? So how did we, like, again, then part of our course, we're looking at Portland. So how did Portland go from literally just nothing to now a regional metro area of 2.34 million? And it started with those early explorers going, I think this is a good spot. And then these plucky, visionaries who are like, let's buy this land, let's clear off and let's sell lots. And then the pioneers come on the heels and help kind of grow that. And then again, the category of the misfits are just those who really utilize or live in the world of divergent thinking. Like they think differently because that's who they are.
I love that. And you talk about a friend in the book named Brian, who you say is a misfit. You would have never heard of him, but you said, maybe other pastors think of him as a contrarian or, a little eccentric. But what I love is you mentioned how you were eating a meal with him. And this is how I think of you. I think of you like walking into a supermarket and you're like the Terminator going, tick, 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 because your deal is missional context. Like, if you just, I'll say this to all you guys, if you want to understand, if there's someone out there who has kind of really a sharp, the person I turn to would be both Upstream and Intrepid on missional context. These guys, that's their deal. I guess Smucker's makes jam. That's what you guys make, right? Intrepid does this. But he said this, your friend Brian, you classify as a misfit, which is a compliment, by the way.
Yes, very much.
If Sean Benesh calls you a misfit, he's saying good things about you. But he says it this way. He says, as we shared a meal, he paused, leaned towards me and said, if you really want to track where the front edge growth of poor communities are, follow the Dollar Tree. And you say he went on to explain how the Dollar Tree has it all figured out in terms of demographic trends and changes. They're one step ahead. When a zip code or neighborhood begins spiraling down, that's when they open a store. In other words, the Dollar Tree knows its target market so well that it follows them wherever they are. That is gold right there. And, I read that, Sean, and I think, oh gosh, I want to look at my world that way. Right. I want to understand that about my world. How can planners, are you born a misfit? Do you become a misfit? Are misfits made or born? I mean, how have you seen this? Can you start off as a card carrying megachurch pastor, get broken, hit the skids and start all over and become a misfit?
Yeah. And honestly, this is literally something that I've really been wrestling with a lot lately. And I think there definitely is, again, I only have the basis of my own life, right? So I can't jump into the minds of other people. But I think for me, there was definitely, it's like anything, there was something innate, right? So again, my trajectory in life up until I came to Christ was art. Like, I'm going to pursue the arts. I'm going to go to art school. This is what I'm doing. And then I met Jesus, wrestling with, like, again, I didn't have categories. I'm like, my life was a dumpster fire. Lord, you have it all. And people heard that and they're like, I think God's calling you into ministry. And I'm like, oh, okay, sure, let's do it. And they're like, you should go to a Christian school. Like, done. So I transferred and then, went on the whole ministry track, undergrad in biblical studies, pastoral ministries, master's in church planning and church growth, etc. But it was almost like the old creative side of me was, like, I never heard about that in college. It wasn't like the arts or anything like that. It was almost like that was put on a shelf. But I also realized, looking back, like my first 2 ministry positions out of college, I always got in trouble with the senior pastor. And it wasn't because I was doing stupid things. It was because I was just starting new things. I was reshuffling things around. Like I was
Benesh started that Twister ministry again. We got to talk to him.
Yeah, so I was getting in trouble. And that's where, for me, once I stepped into church planning, then it's like, the light started turning on. And that really began fueling. And it was like, how do I continue to move myself into this and finally come to the acceptance, like I'm not trying to be, but I know I'm creative. I'm not trying to be like a dirtbag, but I know I'm a disruptor, and I'm finally comfortable with that. But that's not out of angst. It's just there's something hardwired, and it was in there, but I felt like I never really had the freedom to cultivate it, nor the framework. And that's why I always say, like, I had to step out of the mainstream of the ministry machinery just so I could feed that. And so any thinking or thoughts is because I'm now out of that echo chamber.
Well, and that's kind of the point, isn't it? That, a lot of what you're pushing towards in this book and also in Intrepid in general is to disassociate yourself from the money aspect. of ministry. And those two are very connected. So when you're in seminary, they don't want to encourage you to think outside the box because they're trying to teach you, hey, you need money to do this. And nobody who's going to give you money wants you to go blaze a new trail. They want you to do what's time-tested, safe, secure, predictable, because there's money attached to it, which is why I love the idea that you're saying, hey, bivocationalism, as Briscoe calls it, Covo, this is going to free you up. And you've got a real passion towards entrepreneurship in ministry. That whole idea of almost if you're going to take a risk with your whole life and start business, take risk with the church as well. How are those two connected? That's my final question today.
Yeah. So even as you're talking, again, it's the reminder of, because I feel like on some levels, like this, I mean, there's nothing new under the sun. And I hear that all the time from church planners in our cohort. Like we had a guy who was on staff at a church and finally he just had to step down because this church just doesn't get what he wants to do. And all he wants to do is he wants to move across the country, find a low-income, declining rural community and start a business in there. And out of that, plant a church. And his church doesn't get him. And I hear that all the time from those in our cohorts. They're like, our church doesn't get us, our supporters don't get us. But the irony of it all is, the irony of it all is, and I tell the guys all the time, is like, but imagine this. If everything you were doing overseas, then all of a sudden everyone's gonna be like, yeah, man, you're awesome. Of course you should do that. Of course you should go to Dublin and start like a motorcycle lifestyle apparel brand and connect with, you know what I mean? Like, of course you should go to Mumbai and start a community development nonprofit. Of course you should do this. Like, we know, like, again, it's that geography game. Why is stuff over there brilliant, innovative, and right on? And then you do those same things here and people are like, that's not how church planning should be done. And again, that's why I'm like, if you really want to do that, you got to figure out how to fund it because you will be labeled a misfit. Yep. Again, you're not doing it out of angst. Yeah.
That right there, if you're going to do that, you better figure out how to fund it. I love that. And I think in the first century, right? I mean, wasn't that kind of Paul's big deal? He collides into Priscilla and Aquila in Corinth on the second missionary journey. Game over. You know, that right there freed that man up. There's even a verse in that chapter where it says, and when I think it was like Timothy and Silas turn up, they're like, they found Paul doing, I don't remember what ministry it was, preaching the gospel. There's a way that it's phrased that he's freed up just to do that for a time when he collides with Priscilla and Aquila. But then I think what happens, right, is that they kind of franchise this tent making business, right? That all these missionaries they're entrepreneurs at the same time. They're starting up tent making businesses. I mean, that's to me, that's the next iteration of what I want to follow is very much what you're doing, but that is teaching people how to start up something that's going to help them make a living.
Yeah.
Because if we can combine those two things, then you can almost hit the reset button on the church planning of the future. You could change the trajectory of church planning forever if you figured out that piece, right?
Yeah, and again, the beauty is that it is the financial piece, and it's also that missionary piece, right?
Financial Peace University? Just joking.
unless they're a paid sponsor of this podcast. Maybe they should.
Sorry, I can't help it. The punk in me sees the punk in you, and it's gonna happen.
Oh, yeah. So, yeah, there's the financial piece, but there's also, again, that missionary piece because, I mean, I always say like this, most fully funded church planners have what I call creepy church planning syndrome, right? Because they're fully funded, they hang out in coffee shops, they're trying to strike up conversations to get to know people. But if you're out there either working bivocational or you're starting like a legitimate business, you don't even have to try. Your whole life is surrounded by people who would have no interest in your cool hip gathering. I don't care if you have cool pour-over bar, whatever. So there's that missionary piece that you're surrounded by people who are not going to be interested in you as a church planter. But you as an entrepreneur, definitely.
Yeah. No, that's fantastic. Well, guys, my guest today has been Sean Benesh, and we have been talking about his latest book. I want to encourage you, again, head on over to intrepidmissions.com. I should know that because I'm on the mailing list. But the book is, and honestly, track with this dude. You guys know I'm careful on this podcast who I tried to hook you up with. But for real, I learned from Sean. I learned a ton from Sean through Barren Wastelands, In Search of Explorers, Pioneers, Misfits, and the Apostolic Imagination. You can head on over to his website, intrepidmissions.com, and pick that up. Definitely sign up to his newsletter. And Sean, man, thanks so much for coming on today.
Yeah, thank you. It's been fun.
All right. Oh, I got 2 commercials that I got to give you guys. Number one, Sean, while you're starting up all of this, sorry, I can't. Normally, my partner and I we riff off of this commercial, but while you're doing all this, entrepreneurial stuff and starting up all these churches, obviously, you don't have time to do your bookkeeping, right? So you got to go to simplifychurch.com, right? That's our. But they'll handle all your. This is what Sean Benesh would say right here. They'll handle all your bookkeeping needs, yada yada yada. So there's church planner packages, so it'll help you do all the finances, so you can focus on your business. Maybe they'll do both. Check them out. So, anyways, second commercial I got is the Exponential right now is doing fall roundtables focus on ethnicity, diversity, the tensions that have come to a head in America. And if you don't know this, I mean, the Jerusalem Council was basically to deal with the colliding of 2 cultures that were, as the gospel was spreading, there were ethnic tensions between the Jews and Gentiles, and they had to sort that out. We believe that everything that's happening right now in society is really, these tensions coming to a head. Justice, reconciliation, this is where the church ought to really shine. And unfortunately, we don't. We have not been ready for this conversation. And Exponential right now is saying, well, better late than never. Let's have the conversations. Let's meet. So they're doing a series rather than doing 6 regional conferences. They're taking it to the local church, 100 cities, 100 different gatherings with various speakers. I think there's like 60 different people to choose. You choose a topic that fits your context and you talk it through. And it's all about having conversations. So I want to encourage you to head over to multiply.org and register for these 100 roundtables that are going to replace regionals. It's going to be taking it again to a local city context, and it's going to be an amazing time. So definitely check that out. And thanks for joining us today on the Church Planter Podcast. My guest has been Sean Benesh. His new book just dropped, Through Barren Wastelands, In Search of Explorers, Pioneers, Misfits, and the Apostolic Imagination. Again, his website, intrepidmissions.com. And in the meantime, this has been Peyton Jones, minus Pete Mitchell, reminding you, if you want to reach the ones nobody's reaching, you need to go where nobody's going and do what nobody's doing.
Thanks for joining us for another weekly episode of the Church Planter Podcast with Pete Mitchell and Peyton Jones. We'd love to hear your comments on this episode of the Church Planter Podcast. Visit us online and let us know what you thought at churchplanterpodcast.com. If you subscribe to us via iTunes and have enjoyed the podcast, leave us a positive review. The more positive reviews we receive in iTunes, the more iTunes will promote us to other church planners who would benefit from this show. This podcast is brought to you by the Church Planter Magazine, which is available in the iTunes newsstand or online via churchplantermagazine.com.